Hey everyone, my name is Lizzie and today we'll be talking about fizzy drinks. So does anyone make some? I know that usually cider makers and beer makers, they have to add that little fizz. So it's not always the case for mead winemakers or sake. And I'm curious to know how you do this. So based on my research, I saw that there were actually tablets that you can add once your fermentation is done, but let's get into it deeper. Because if you've been watching my videos or other videos on YouTube, you must know that when yeast eats sugar during fermentation, they produce alcohol, but they also produce CO2. And CO2 is that fizz that we're talking about. However, how do you balance having enough CO2, but keeping it under control so your bottles don't explode and make a mess all over the kitchen or the fridge? So a couple of tips based on my research was to add priming sugar. And priming sugar just means the sugar that you add to your alcohol in order for it to have fizz. It was also recommended to leave your bottles in the fridge. And leaving it in the fridge would make sense because after fermentation is done, no matter how much yeast you try to remove, there might always be that residue because we're not distilling. So we're not stripping your home brew out of all its nutrients. We're not purifying your home brew. So there might be a little yeast, and once you put that yeast in the fridge, it becomes dormant. So once you add the sugar and the yeast is dormant, there's less chances that a fermentation happens actively in the fridge and that your bottles explode. And another recommendation was to leave it in glass bottles. For sure, if glass bottles explode, well, it's that much harder to deal with, but I believe that glass bottles are more resistant than other types. And for fizz, so this is only applicable for fermented drinks because do people have fizzy vodka or fizzy whiskey? Personally, I've never heard that before. Let me know in the comments below if where you're from they have vodka with fizz or any hard liquor with fizz. You might have some in mixed drinks, like in those cans. However, I'm talking about those 40% bottles. I believe it's more of a fermented drink characteristic because once you distill, you remove a lot more yeast, you remove a lot more sugar, you really strip the alcohol to its natural form, and these tablets, these priming tablets, will have no other chemical to react with. If you've done fizzy hard liquor before, just drop a comment below and I'd be interested in knowing how that happens. So I also looked into replacing the priming sugar. Can you replace this with any other sugar? And the answer is yes. And this is because when there's regular sugar, yeast eats it and provides alcohol, but also CO2. Although I heard that by adding regular sugar, it makes your beer, if you're making beer, it'll make it taste like cider. I'm not sure if that's true. So drop a comment below and let me know if you can only use priming sugar for beer or else it affects the taste. And also by adding this priming sugar, does it increase your alcohol percentage because now the yeast has more sugar to eat? The answer is no, because in order to add the priming sugar, you need to first dilute it in water. And by adding water and sugar, the alcohol is not going to increase by a significant amount. And you have to add the priming sugar in boiling water. Why boiling water? Is because you need less water to dissolve the priming sugar when it's boiling because it's hotter, and that way you're diluting your alcohol less. And not only does the boiling water dilute the alcohol less, but it also sanitizes, so it's a 2-in-1. You kill two birds in one stone. So for those wondering how much priming sugar should you add to your alcohol, well, some may think I was gonna say it depends on your taste, but there are online calculators for this, and you just plug in the values in. So it's going to ask you for the amount of sugar. It's going to ask for very specific attributes of your alcohol in order to determine exactly how much priming sugar you need so it doesn't explode. If you put fizz in your alcohol, do you use the calculator or do you just add based on an eye test, which I would, just a disclaimer, say that could be dangerous and you might need a lot of practice before doing it with an eye test, but I'm curious to know. And based on my research, there's a little rule of thumb here that for 5 gallons of alcohol, you should add 3/4 cup of dextrose and 2/3 cups of sucrose. So those two, they don't get fermented at the same levels. For more information, sucrose is 100% fermentable, while dextrose is only 91% fermentable. Sucrose and dextrose are interchangeable in recipes, even if they have different fermentable capabilities. And I was reading other recommendations because you have to go with multiple sources, and Someone else was suggesting 0.54 ounces of priming sugar per gallon. So this varies. It depends how strong you want the fizz to be. Do you want it to be light? Do you want it to be something that really cuts your throat? So that's something to consider. And there's also something called conditioning tablets. These are sort of fizz drops, and it comes in candy-like packages like sugar, and it carbonates every time without even needing calculation. So this is the easy fix. You just drop it in and it's the right amount every time. It just costs more, but you don't have to use the online calculator. And just make sure you only use one, because if you use two or more, then there's a high probability that your jar will explode. And in terms of how long should you leave the priming sugar or the tablet, it's suggested that for light beer, you leave it for about a week. And if it's not light beer, if you want something more strong, heavier, with more impact, you can leave it for a month roughly. And just like when you're making alcohol with no fizz, you shouldn't add any oxygen inside your wash once you add the priming sugar or the fizz drops. So you want to make sure you close the lid. You should not stir it, because stirring leaves a chance for oxygen to enter your wash. And the oxygen affects the flavor and the color of the alcohol. I'm thinking of trying fizz in the future. It'd be really interesting. Drop a comment below if you have any more tips that you'd like to share with the community. And if you found this video valuable, share with a friend. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.